Despite harvesting a lot of tomatoes this year, the trellis system used to support those tomato plants was an absolute mess. Basically, this video is me talking about how I screwed a perfectly good system up. Thanks for watching the video today. This is a video of Diego on Tomato. This year started out really good when it came to raising tomatoes. I thought I did everything right. I started plants at the right time. I got them in the ground at the right time. I didn't do potting up this year, and I planted them. They started growing, things looked great. It looked magnificent out there. And then within about a week, it went from a pristine garden that looked beautiful to pretty darn ratchet. Everything was a mess. The biggest cause of that mess was my trellis system. It was an absolute disaster. I want to be very clear at the outset of this video. The Florida Weave trellis system is a perfectly good system. It's a proven system. It's one that many growers use all over the world. Commercial growers use this system. There's nothing wrong with it. The only thing that was wrong with the system that I put in was how I applied the system and how I managed the system. But sometimes you don't know what's obvious until you do it the wrong way and screw it up and then say, that was obvious. This year, the goal for the trellis system was a Florida Weave system. It's a pretty simple system. At its core are T-posts in the ground or some sort of stakes in the ground. Your plants are in between the stakes, and then you're wrapping twine around the T-posts and the plants. As the plants grow taller, you're adding more and more layers of twine up the stakes, and they're providing support along the sides to hold the plants which just want to bush out and flop over, and mine ended up just flopping over because the twine was breaking. I really wanted to use the system because I thought it would be so easy. I didn't think I was going to have any sort of problems with it. I thought the maintenance level would be low. I would be dealing with several plants at a time as I wrap the twine, instead of just wrapping one plant around the twine as I've done in the past. And while things may seem like a lot less work, sometimes they just don't pan out with the results that you want. Now, overall, I think the system itself has merit. I think the Florida Weave is a great trellising system. I just think you have to put that system in a way that's going to give you the best chances of success. Use good twine, make sure your stakes are good and strong in the ground, and make sure to actually wrap the twine around the plants and the stakes as needed, which you can do based upon observing the plants themselves. You want to wrap them sooner versus later. If you wait too long, they're never going to want to stay straight. They're just going to be flopping over. You try and pick them up and wrap, and it's just a mess. Nobody's going to do it. You're not going to do it. Once you lose control of the system, it's gone. It's chaos at that point. Some other advantages of the Florida Weave system is it scales. I mean, a lot of field growers use this system because it's low tech. It doesn't require a lot of expensive infrastructure to put in. You're just buying stakes and twine. I mean, that's relatively cheap, and it doesn't matter if your row is 10 feet long or 1,000 feet long. You're just continuing it along. So it scales linearly at a pretty low cost. And it's a trellis system that I thought would work wonders at the beginning of the year, but at the end of the year I look back and say, this is kind of one of those macro things. Why go out there and try and reinvent the wheel? Why go out there and tweak something that's proven? Why do we do this? Why do I do it? You do it too, I'm sure you do. There's proven systems out there for many things in life, yet we think we can do it better. Oh, I'm just gonna swap out this piece. Yet generations and thousands of people and millions of dollars have been spent perfecting systems that work, but we want to change them. Don't change them. What was I thinking? It didn't work well at all. The biggest issue I had with my trellis system was everything. I mean, everything. T-posts didn't stay up straight. Twine I used to support the tomatoes, it was snapping and breaking all over the place. The plants that were growing straight and looking great when everything was beautiful suddenly started falling over and flopping all over like Neymar on the soccer field. So what specifically was the biggest issue within the trellis system? The biggest issue within the trellis system was the twine. The twine that I used was terrible. I would never, ever recommend using this twine to trellis tomatoes. Why not? It gets wet, it breaks. It gets wet, it rots. It's out in the sun, it breaks. You put a lot of weight on it, it stretches and breaks. If an object's sole purpose is to provide support, and yet it cannot do that over the length of time that you need support provided, why use it? Do not use this to trellis tomatoes. The only probably good use for this in the garden when it comes to tomatoes is if you wanted to tie a tomato to a stake, I could see you using this. Because it's not going to be holding a bunch of weight if you're tying something to a stake, and you're probably also going to be tying off that stem at several points along the stake, so the weight is distributed, not putting a bunch on this. But as soon as you start stretching this thing out, putting a lot of weight on it, getting the sun on it, getting some water on it, break, 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 don't use it. Now, why did I want to use that? Number one, it's cheap. Number two, it's compostable. So let's look at those. Cheap. Well, there are poly twines out there. There's something actually called tomato twine that's made out of plastic that's a lot stronger, that's not going to break, and it's equally cheap. So really, cheapness is not a factor. Your number two reason for doing this is it's compostable. Yet that's really only important if you compost your tomatoes. I don't compost my tomatoes because of disease. My tomatoes go in the green bin. So while I don't want to be putting plastic in the green bin, I kind of don't care as much as if I was putting plastic in my own compost piles. So, assuming, but that's how I think. One thing I've learned from talking to a lot of farmers is there are proven ways to do things. There are systems that work. And if you follow the systems that work, success tends to come easier. You're pushing the ball downhill instead of pushing the ball uphill. Fight the easy battles, take the easy wins, follow things that work and innovate on the side. The second biggest issue with my trellis system were my T-posts. They were too far apart. I had 5 or 6 plants in between each T-post that probably put the T-posts about 7 feet apart, and as a result, the twine going in between each T-post got really flexy. Let me show you a little model I made to illustrate that point. Here we have some pencils drilled into a board. This is 1 unit, this is 2 units apart. When we press down on this, we can see that that string wobbles somewhat and the T-posts flex. We have the same string in between these 2 posts which are further apart, and when you press down with about the same amount, the string goes further and the T-posts bend more. Put your T-posts closer together and you get less room for sag. One thing I've learned about buying twine or rope is it all stretches. It's all going to have some sag. I've even bought low stretch rope and it still stretches and it still sags. So by getting your T-posts closer together, you can pull that rope tighter and hopefully keep more tension on it than setting the T-posts farther apart. My solution next year will be going to about 3 plants in between each T-post and put that spacing at around 5 feet versus 7 feet, which I had this year. One other issue I have with my T-posts is they may not be tall enough. I may need to get taller T-posts. I have a very loose soil, not a heavy clay soil, so putting a T-post into the ground, it has to go really deep to get secure. If you have an 8-foot T-post and you put 3 feet of it in the ground, you only have 5 feet above ground. Is that enough above ground? It probably isn't. I probably need to go to like a 10-foot T-post. And yeah, I do have to put my T-posts about 3 feet in the ground to get them solid. Take a look at this example you're seeing on the screen. One T-post is 1 foot in the ground, another is 2 feet in the ground, another is 3 feet in the ground. Look what happens when I try and push them over. The 1 foot deep T-post goes right over. The 2 foot deep T-post goes over, but not as much, and the 3 foot T-post, it's pretty stable. So look at your own soil conditions, evaluate those conditions, and size your T-posts accordingly. Once those T-posts start leaning, you're never going to get them back up straight. The only thing I've ever seen lean that far and come back is Michael Jackson in the Smooth Criminal video, which you can watch right here on YouTube, where he leans way over and he comes back. I mean, I'm on my knees. It's hard for me to do it there. I don't know how he ever did it standing up. And sure as hell, T-posts and soil aren't going to do this type of thing and come back up. One thing that you'll see in this picture looking at these stakes is they're not very tall. So you don't necessarily need tall stakes. You want to size the stakes to the types of tomato plants that you're growing. If you're growing determinate plants, they're probably not going to get very tall, so you don't need that much height above ground. If you're going to try and grow a vining type in a Florida weave, an indeterminate tomato, you're going to need longer stakes to accommodate the height because those plants want to just keep getting bigger and bigger, where determinants don't. Small plant, small stakes. Big plant, big stakes. So we can say my system was perfect or we can say my system was imperfect, but regardless of whether you have a perfect or imperfect system, if you don't use the system, what's the point of having it? That's the third biggest issue with this system. I just didn't use it as well as I should have. As the days get longer, as the days get warmer, tomato plants start growing really fast. And if you're using a weave system, you have to wrap them more than you think you do. You have to look at them and wrap them based upon height gain versus just once a week. Because every week you're not going to get the same amount of growth, and that's where I screwed up. I was wrapping them about once a week, and at some point in the season I think they were growing about 15 or 20 inches a week, and by that time you go to wrap, they're all tall, they're leaning one way, gravities came into play, the wind's blowing some over. It was just a mess. You couldn't get a good, effective weave to provide a structure to the whole system, so it became the disaster that it was. So between the twine and the T-posts and not trellising the tomatoes as much as I should have, it was just this unvirtuous circle that was spiraling things down until it was eventually as though I didn't have a trellis system at all, and these were just field tomatoes, and I was just letting them go. Because that's what I ended up doing. And as much as I've screwed this system up, at least I'm learning from my mistakes after 1 year, unlike the New York Knicks, who have been a failure and an embarrassment year after year after year for 25 years. At the end of the day, it's all good to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. What's important is you can identify those mistakes, learn from them, and correct them going forward, and be proud enough to come on YouTube and admit how bad you screwed up something that was actually really easy. Maybe one of the better morals of the story here is come up with a plan ahead of time. I think a lot of this trellis system plan I formulated on the fly, and usually anytime you're figuring something out on the fly, it might not be the best decision. A lot of prom night decisions happen that way. So plan in advance, although a lot of prom night decisions might be planned in advance as well, but nonetheless, plan in advance to try and get things right from the start. Look, it's October, we're going into winter. Think about your land, your system. What types of tomatoes are you going to be growing next year? How do you want to support those tomatoes? Do you want to try something new? Start learning about that now. Start researching it now. Maybe you want to use the system you used last year. That's fine if that system actually worked really well. Do you know if it worked well? Look back, think back at that system. What were the good parts of that system? What were the bad parts of that system? And how can you minimize, remove, or at least correct the bad parts of the system to make life easier next year so it can just be plant, harvest, and eat? I really want to make a video on my trellis system today because the trellising system for tomatoes is really the key to the system. You can have great tomato plants, but if you don't support those plants in a way that helps you mitigate disease, get the most productivity, access the fruit, and fix problems as they arise, then there's no use in having good tomato plants. So learn from my mistakes, use a twine that can actually support your tomatoes, use T-post space adequately and deep enough in the ground to help support that twine, and be sure to wrap that twine around your tomatoes as they need it, which you can tell by observing those tomatoes. This was Diego on TOMATO. I hope the tips helped in this video. There'll be more videos on tomatoes ahead coming up. Stay tuned for those, and until then, be nice, be thankful, and do the work. No, it ain't coming out. It's not coming out. 3 feet in the ground. Now it's stuck.
I gotta get the post puller.